All right, welcome back. We are continuing our village history story profiles as we get to know our state one village at a time. And this episode is actually going to be pre-recorded. Typically, I record it on Monday, post it on Monday, but next week on Monday, I will be busy doing an annual inspection. And so I'm pre-recording this. So this is not as up to date as they usually are. Well, when you do history, though, if you're a few days back, no big deal. Well, today we're going to be doing Chiniak and, hang on, I got to look at it and make sure I pronounce it right. And Chistochina. Chiniak and Chistochina today. So we'll just dive right in and we'll do Chiniak, Alaska to start. Chiniak is located on the easternmost point of Kodiak Island. This was a fun place to look at on Google Earth. Anything on Kodiak Island is going to be beautiful. And at first glance at this place, it can be described as very remote. It's a remote island town with breathtaking ocean views. If you want to have what you might call a soul moment, my wife and I have this joke. You know, if you see someone like looking out at a beautiful view in nature, we always say that person's having a soul moment. So if you want to have a good soul moment as you look out at a beautiful view of creation, this might be the place for you in Chiniak. So that's true of anything on Kodiak Island, really. Just a stunningly beautiful place. But Chiniak is kind of on a corner of the island. It's sort of in a little area of its own. You know, or if you wanted to make, you know, the next big epic wilderness action movie, you should go to Chiniak. Looks like a great place for that. The word Chiniak is a Russian Aleut word, or an Aleutic in the Aleutic language, which Aleutic is a branch of the Yupik language, but it's considered a separate language. But they're, they branch off of each other. There's only about 4,000 people today who are considered to be Aleutic, and the language is considered to be endangered. But there are efforts in the schools to keep the language going. The word Chiniak literally means a point, referring to a point of land projecting out into the water, so like a peninsula. And it certainly is on that sort of landmass. On this point lies Chiniak Lake, Chiniak Lagoon, Cape Chiniak, and it projects into Chiniak Bay, and the point points to a small island out on the water, and you'll never guess what the name is. Yep, Chiniak Island. So a lot of Chiniaks around here, including the name of the village, and it means a point. Very aptly named. The first mention of this location was by Captain Cook in 1778, but he named it Cape Grayville. Now I use my ForeFlight, my basically pilot app. On my sectional chart on ForeFlight, there is a point that's still there called Cape Grayville. It's just a little point just to the side. And so it seems likely that Chiniak wasn't renamed from Grayville, but Grayville was just kind of added. Or Chiniak was added. I assume Chiniak came first since it is a Aleutic name. But as Captain Cook explored Alaska, he was naming locations after like politicians or prominent figures. You know, he named like Prince William Sound after Prince William at the time. And that name stuck. And he was naming these locations along his way. And so I was trying to find out who Grayville was, but I didn't really find anything. So it might be lost to history on that one. So many mysteries in the world still. Okay. In 1888, a little over 100 years after Captain Cook, a man named Lieutenant Commander Tanner of the U.S. Navy on the steamer Albatross, he seems to have first mentioned the name Chiniak that we have writings for. The Albatross was a research ship launched in 1882 and decommissioned in 1921. This is one of my bunny trails. You know, I bunny trail this stuff. The Albatross was built in Delaware and started being used to research the migrations of mackerel menhaden. Oh, I don't know if I pronounced that right. It's a type of bird. And other migratory species of birds in Massachusetts. Over the years, it looks like it did research up and down the East Coast and eventually it was sent over to the Pacific. And it made its way around South America, making a stop at the Galapagos, and finally arrived in San Francisco. Then it became a research vessel for the West Coast, going all the way up to Alaska and down to Mexico. And one of the places I went to, this is cool, was Guaymas, Sonora, which my family has a home there, and I have spent a lot of time in Guaymas, so it's neat. I took a similar route as the Albatross steamship. So that was cool. The time in Alaska was that when it was up there was researching the fur and fish industries in Alaska at the time. Remember, this was during the Russian fur trade that was going on. Apparently, in 1888, Tanner made his way by this area, and he wrote down the name Chiniak, which is our village today. So that's a long way to say that this boat started in Massachusetts and it has been around and around, and even continued on having adventures. Hang on, I'm in my cabin, and my wood stove is torching me. I got to open a window. There we go. Much better. So Tanner, the lieutenant commander of the Albatross, I found a picture of him. He has one of those mustaches that's just worth mentioning. It kind of starts under his nose and it continues down past his lips and down past his chins as like handlebars. It's just epic. I think it was the style then for men. It seems like you see the old photos of like the Alaska Gold Rush, or even I'm reminded of like Civil War commanders. They all had those epic handlebar mustaches. Anyway, this guy had one to an extreme. It was pretty epic. Good old Tanner. All right. Anyway, the Albatross later served in the U.S. Served the U.S. in the Spanish-American War, and later explored the South Pacific Islands. So he was all the way out there, even to Hawaii and the Philippines and all those places. And he made his way back to Alaska. Then it served in World War I, where they kind of armed it with guns and everything. And then they finally retired the ship in 1921. So this little steamship that just one day sailed past our village in 1888 was quite a piece of history. Of the Albatross, the ship, the Smithsonian said, the Albatross, designed to go anywhere in the world and work in the greatest depths, contributed more to our knowledge of marine fishes than any other ship. So there we go. That is where our first mention of our village today comes from. That was just kind of a fun bunny trail for me to go down. Yeah, thanks for going on that one with me. Interestingly, there is a record of Chiniak in the 1880 census. So I know I said Tanner was the first to mention it. It's funny when you read these sources, sometimes they conflict a little bit. So anyway, there's a record of Chiniak in the 1880 census, which was the first census conducted by the United States in Alaska. And at the time, it recorded 24 native residents. But we don't see a census record again until 1990, 110 years later. And in 1990, it recorded 69 residents. Now, according to the source, the name first shows up in 1888 by Lieutenant Commander Tanner. Let's see. Oh, I repeated it myself in my notes. So there you go. It actually did show up in the 1880 census. But I'm not sure how that squares. There you go. It's a mystery. 1880, or was it 1888 by Tanner? Well, we'll go with Tanner because he had a great mustache. All right, the 2020 census records 61 people in Chiniak. Interestingly, the 2000 census records that almost all the residents of Chiniak were white. So clearly native peoples left this area, and it's primarily a non-native community. Now, I was curious about why would they leave. Maybe it was disease. Disease plays a crucial role in the history of Native Alaskans, as it was just so devastating for them. So it could have been that. It could have been that they just wanted to be left alone and they left the area when the outsiders came in. I don't know. But while this is a small community, it still has electricity, telephones, running water, paved roads, a school, which we'll talk about in a minute, a post office, and a library. Now, regarding the school, the school has one teacher in it for K through 12. Just one teacher. And my source here notes that a woman named Elaine Griffin was that one teacher back in the 90s. And in 1995, she received an award called the Milken Educator Award for the National Teacher of the Year. She was invited to Washington, D.C. by President Bill Clinton, who presented to her this award at the White House at an outdoor event. And I actually went on YouTube and I watched this because this is our village today. And this is what President Clinton said with our Chiniak teacher, Elaine Griffin. This is what President Clinton said of her. He says, well, just like Jessie Stewart, he's referencing a woman who wrote a book about teaching at a small school. Well, just like Jessie Stewart, the 1995 National Teacher of the Year has taught in a one-room schoolhouse, but hers is in rural Alaska, referring to Elaine now, and in Chiniak, where it's a little colder in the wintertime. Elaine Griffith's work at the Kodiak Island schools of Ahtna and Chiniak over the past 20 years have significantly expanded the educational, social, and cultural environments for the students in her K through 12 classroom. With her husband Ned, she brings in members of the community to share in their talents with the students. And as the students learn about their own history, they are also being taught to understand distant lands. Oh, I like that. Distant lands. Many of the students have participated in foreign exchange programs, and I must say, says Bill Clinton, Elaine and Ned have created their own cultural exchange with their 3 remarkable children, whom I just had the privilege of meeting in the Oval Office, whom I know that she will introduce in a moment. College attendance has increased significantly among their students. That's great news for Alaska. And Bill Clinton says, and in Akiak, a remote village where teen pregnancy, alcoholism, and suicide were common, Elaine expanded the K through 8 program so that it included high school. Today, 90% of the children in that remote village graduate from high school. All right, I got to pause because 90% for an Alaska school is very, very high. So this is very impressive. So Bill Clinton continues, and America is better for it. Elaine, it is my pleasure to present the 1995 Apple Award. So I don't know why it says Apple Award because my other source names a different award. So same issues with the other stuff. But honoring you as the National Teacher of the Year, to thank you on behalf of all the American people for your dedication to your students and the best in this country. You are truly a model for all the teachers of this country, but for all the citizens as well. Congratulations and God bless you. Now, I kind of read all that. I know it was kind of a long quote, but I read all that because I love that such a tiny place like Chiniak with just, I think, 61 residents and just a few students can get national attention. Not that just for the attention, but it reminds me that while I can't solve all the world's giant problems, you turn on the news today and it's like these giant issues. But what I can do is just love my neighbor. And if all of us just kind of turned off the news and went and loved our neighbor, I think the bad things on those news would start to fade away. So with politics today, putting our attention to big, huge things that there's not much we can do about it except for vote every few years. Just a good reminder from this teacher to just love the people and care for the people, your neighbors, your family, the people next to you. And maybe you'll be invited by the president to the White House. Who knows? All right, there's no registered runways in Chiniak. However, I can see what looks like a dirt runway, which is, since I have 4 flight, I can measure it. It's about 2,300 feet long, and which is near the village. So it's good for small planes, but no registered airstrip, and there's no road to it. So it's pretty remote in that way. Now, this was really cool. Something else I found here at Chiniak, totally unique. Chiniak hosts a device called a SuperDARN, which is an acronym for Super Dual Auroral Radar Network. SuperDARN. So pretty fun to say. And the acronym is a mouthful. I had to find out what on earth this thing was because I could see it in Google Earth. But here's what it is. The SuperDARN. Not only is it funny to say, but it's also a scientific radar network consisting of 35 high-frequency radars located around the world. It is used to map high-latitude plasma convention in the F region of the ionosphere. There's a nice scientific nerdy mouthful there. In other words, these radars are for studying phenomena in our atmosphere, so it's pretty cool. Each station can cover 1 million square kilometers, which sounds pretty impressive to me. Now, when you see these things, they look like power lines, like kind of like those tall metal, power line towers, and they do have like cables between them. So that's what it looks like. This particular station is operated by the University of Fairbanks, University of Alaska Fairbanks, who also operates 2 of these stations in Antarctica. So it sounds like if I wanted to go to Antarctica, I should sign up to run a SuperDARN station. I can't help, just want to say that more. I want to help run a SuperDARN station. You can attend one of the SuperDARN workshops, which meet each year in various places around the world. So if you want to work at a SuperDARN station in Antarctica, you should go to one of those. That was pretty cool. A way to study atmospheric phenomenon. A lot of talk about plasma. This is not the world I live in, so I don't understand it all. But it is pretty cool that here in this little town of Chiniak, not only has had national attention from President Bill Clinton, but it's also got apparently an important radar for studying our atmosphere called a SuperDARN. I just got to find more ways to say SuperDARN because it's kind of funny. Okay. I do not see any churches in Chiniak for the 61 residents there. But I did find a brief reference to a church called Frontier Church, which was reaching out to some families in Chiniak. So I did find a little bit of that. And I think that was from a Frontier Church, I believe is a Baptist church. But I did not find any churches actually in Chiniak. There are, however, many churches in Kodiak, which is the nearest village, but even that is still 45 miles away, and there's no road to it. You have to take a plane or a boat, so it's pretty cut off. All right, so that was a lot for a village for just 61 people, but I bunny trailed it like crazy. So this will be a slightly longer episode because next we're going to do Chistochina. And I bunny trailed this one a bit too, but not as much. So here we go. The village of Chistochina is located at the midway point between the Canada-US border and Anchorage. So if you are making that drive from Anchorage to Canada up that highway, Chistochina is a halfway spot. It's just north of Glen Allen along the Tok Cutoff Highway and is at the confluence of the Chistochina River and the Copper River. Chistochina is small, remote, but it is on the road system. It began as an Ahtna Athabascan fish camp and a stopover place for traders and trappers. So I'm finding that many Alaskan villages have their origins at a pit stop for weary travelers, including the Athabascans themselves, who use this as a fish camp, a place to stop to fish, to process the fish, and then take them home. And this is one of those historical places. The name Chistochina means blue river. Blue river. So it does look like Chistochina River is a glacial runoff river, which means that usually means the river is like gray and silty. I don't usually personally like glacial rivers. They're just kind of gray and silty, not very clear. But the river can be blue, which comes from glaciers, grinding up rocks, and the grinding makes something called rock flour, which is what we often call silt. And this rock flour is suspended in the water, and it can produce a milky blue or turquoise color. And it really is beautiful, the places that turn these colors. There's plenty of glacial blue lakes and rivers in Alaska, and they are so beautiful. I have spent a lot of time flying over the tundra, and every now and then you'll see one of these very blue turquoise lakes and rivers it just looks almost unnatural. The colors. Anyway, it's so beautiful. Let's see. In the early years, there was only a small access road for Chistochina, and that turned into the Valdez Eagle Trail, built in 1897 to serve the gold rush at the time. And this trail was also used by the U.S. Army to serve telegraph lines from Valdez to Eagle between 1901 and 1904. Now, I've talked about that line before, so I'm not going to bunny trail that. Anyway, but during the gold rush, gold was found among the upper Chistochina River and the surrounding creeks that kind of run off of it. And that brought in a lot of homesteaders. Well, I don't know if a lot, but it brought in homesteaders. The Chistochina Lodge was built during this time, and which served as a roadhouse for the prospectors. Now, despite the gold rush, Chistochina still claims to be the most traditional of all the Ahtna Athabascan villages. I thought that was an interesting claim. It's the most traditional. So if you claim something like that, it must be something you take pride in, being at the most traditional of the Ahtna Athabascan villages. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, Chistochina first appears in the census in 1940 with a population of 34. Now, interestingly, this is kind of a little quirk, but in the 1940, the village was listed as Chistochina, which to me seems like a typo, and maybe it was, so probably typed up by a version of me when I was in college. I made so many like typos. I could have gotten better grades in college. Anyway, Chistochina was the name in 1940, and then it was corrected to Chistochina. As of 2020, Chistochina had 60 residents, so it's almost the exact same size as Chiniak. So we have two pretty small villages today. There is an airstrip in Chistochina, and it just simply looks like kind of a grass field, which parallels the highway. It's about 2,060 feet long, and it's labeled as fair grass. So, if it's been raining a lot, you may want to watch out for mud. Anyway, you do need to be careful of landing on something like that because you're paralleling the highway, especially if you're driving. You might be paralleling a landing plane. So, there is a notable mountains to the southeast called Mount Stanford, which reaches to an impressive height. Very impressive, actually. 16,236 feet. I have not even heard of this mountain, and it's at a very impressive height, even for Alaska. I know there's Denali at over 20,000, but very few get above 16,000 like this one. Mount Stanford. Now, I did not, I usually get a name like Stanford, and I'm like, oh, who is that guy? But I decided not to do that. Instead, I looked up the Ahtna Athabascan name for Mount Stanford, which is Kelt'aeni, something like that. I should have looked up the pronunciation. I usually do. I forgot. But that Athabascan word means the one who controls the weather. The one who controls the weather. They also gave this name to what we call Mount Wrangell, which is another huge mountain. I think like 14,000 something in that one mountain. That's further south than Alaska, but they call it, the one who controls the weather. This really interests me. It kind of prompted me to consider about Athabascan spirituality, because if you name a mountain the one who controls the weather, that implies sort of a being or a spirit behind the mountain who can control the weather. And so I just am fascinated by Native spirituality beforehand, and I lived among Native Americans for many years in Mexico, and I got to learn about their worldview, their spirituality, the way they saw things. Now, for the Ahtna Athabascans, they were animistic, and they believed that weather phenomena was alive and well and had its own spirit. So there was sort of a mind or spirit behind weather. So things like wind, rain, snow, thunder, and lightning were purposeful actions, or they might say the breath of spiritual beings. And so therefore their lives were oriented around maintaining harmony with these spirits. So the way that you maintain sort of a peaceful existence is by maintaining harmony with these spirits. If you upset the harmony, that is when the weather gets bad on you. And so that's kind of how they orient themselves, how they orient their lives around this idea of harmony. This is quite similar to when I lived in Mexico with the Tarahumara. I was invited to attend some native rituals. One in particular, I remember I went to, and they killed a cow, and they had bowls of the meat, and they set the meat down in front of like a crucifix, and they did this dance, and they danced all day long, and it was called the rain dance. And this was all about being in harmony with the spirits that cause the rain. And so this idea of harmony and appeasing spirits is what they do. So the name, the one who controls the weather, reminded me of this. And so I kind of bunny trailed it a bit. But it does make me think that, it's incredible to me that pretty much all humans are naturally oriented towards spiritual things. We're naturally oriented towards believing in a spiritual realm. And of course, the native Athabascans had this intuition, and I think they're right. There is a spiritual realm. It's only in our scientific culture that we've produced a minority of people who believe in non-spiritual views of the world, like just pure cause and effect, purposeless laws of nature just kind of bouncing around and things just happening. But the Ahtna Athabascans understood that there was more than just laws of physics to the world. The vast majority of the world is this way. As humans, we kind of sense this. But even if the modern secularists are right, if we are just natural accidents, so why would we even trust our minds to perceive reality anyways? If we are accidents, our minds are accidents, and maybe our minds are just there to give us survivability perceptions rather than reality ones. I think that's why as humans, we recognize we're different than much of the rest of nature. We notice something different. We perceive it. But that's kind of like the mystery of life that all of us wrestle with, and even for them to call this mountain the one who controls the weather, it gives us some insight into their worldview about these things. Now, this does remind me of Job, the book of Job. There's a lot of this kind of talk in Job. And when God is giving Job the closest answer we have to the issue of theodicy. And theodicy is, why is there suffering if God is good? This is like a question people ask very commonly. You almost can't get on Facebook without some form of this question, being on there. But here in Job 38, verses 25 to 27, this is related to weather. God is kind of giving us the closest answer I think we'll get to theodicy. And man, there's books and books on this. And I don't want to go down this bunny trail too much, but a little bit. So here in Job 38, God is responding to Job, and he's going to bring up weather, which is kind of the trail we're on here. And he's trying to make a point with weather, and he uses many other illustrations, but in this case, it's weather. He says, "Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt to bring rain on a land where no man is, on the desert, which there is not man, to satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass." So even where no man even observe it, it is God who makes the rain come on remote areas so that things can grow, and no man will even see it. There are plants out in the tundra of Alaska that this year will grow and die, and no one will even see it. But he sees it, and he delights in the growth. He's making the case here that our perspective is too small to fully grasp the web and ripple effects of his actions, which is especially important as we suffer. The point is we have to trust in his sovereign hand because we are too small to perceive the web and ripple effects of our suffering, because we should expect to not understand. And I think that's the point. We do not see the rain on that remote spot to make that little plant that no one will ever see grow, but he does. He has a greater perspective. Now, the Ahtna Athabascans sought harmony with the spirits for a favorable outcome. And the The biblical worldview or scripture would have us orient ourselves around trusting in God's sovereignty despite our lack of understanding or perception. So I think that's it. That is a subtle difference here. But I am fascinated that the Athabascan spirituality, because, presumably these ideas come from tradition and from nature, but it is missing the biblical revelation, which Christians adhere to. But it's interesting that just from looking at tradition and nature, it seems to be closer to truth than modern secular thought, which is just raw, blind laws of physics working with nothing else behind it all. Now, I do believe in laws of nature. I do believe we can study things scientifically, but there is also behind all those, the reason that physics work and science work is because there's a mind behind it. And there's ultimately a sovereignty behind even the rain that falls in that little tundra plant. So that, I think, is the biblical view. And I think the Athabascans were onto it, just missing the biblical revelation that we have. Okay. So anyway, this really fascinates me. It's something that I think all of us privately wrestle with, even if we don't say it out loud. But I think it is good to engage in that wrestling match. This is sort of early on in scripture is, Jacob wrestles with God, and then God renamed him to Israel, which means to wrestle with God. It's like the whole point is these are hard things, and we ought to wrestle with them and not ignore them. All right, guys, I've gone way too long. I've tried to make these a little shorter, but I'm rambling. Here we go. We are done for the day. No more bunny trails. Next week, we're going to be looking at the story of Chitna, and Cuathbuluk. And these are the next two villages as we get to know our state of Alaska one village at a time. I'll see you then.